Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another program of the ICT's podcast, Counterterrorism Today. I'm Etai Handman, and it is a pleasure to be here once again, introducing another episode of Counterterrorism Today. And as we have been doing over the last couple months in these unprecedented times of the COVID-19 pandemic, I am blessed to be on a Zoom chat now with Colonel retired Miri. She is an associate at the International Institute for Counterterrorism. She served in the Israeli intelligence community and in active duty until she retired at the rank of full colonel in 2004. Colonel Eisen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, and I hope everybody is.
Excellent. Well, appreciate you taking the time, and I appreciate you being willing to discuss the subject matter during this unprecedented time. As I mentioned, that we are here in a COVID-19 pandemic that once we thought was going away or we were getting past it, seems to be coming back in full force once again, especially here in Israel. And so let's start there. We said our discussion today was going to be a little bit about the geostrategic map of the Middle East, what has been going on here since COVID-19, how has the landscape changed, etc. And so let's start with Israel. How has Israel reacted to the COVID-19, and how has mindsets within the national security establishment shifted or changed in any capacity since the pandemic has hit?
So I'm going to address your question looking at it from the national security point of view. One of the one of the odd things that happened in Israel, and I think that in its own way we're slightly exceptional, is that it has been the security establishment who has been the one to stand up. They are the ones who are expected to help out. It is the home front command inside the Israeli Defense Forces that are the ones who are physically out there. It is a joint security room where they've put in analysts from the Israeli intelligence community, from people who before were looking at, global threats, terrorist threats. Now they're looking at the COVID-19 threat. So in that sense, I would say Israel tried to chew this pandemic the way we like to look at national security threats. That's the way we're addressing it. That's both the upside and the downside. This is an issue which needed health authorities. How do you bring in the health aspect to it? How do you bring in civil society, social society? Is this about a ring of command, of hierarchy, the way that the military and security forces work? Or is this something which takes groupthink, getting together, different experts? And I'm saying that because at the beginning, when we did it in a hierarchy manner, it seemed that we were responding, I'm not going to say better, but we were very harsh in our response. We closed down our country for a month, for two, the economy, and then we decided to open up. And in the second stage now of the pandemic taking off, it's not going towards the security establishment, the national security people to be the ones to run it. And it looks a little bit different. There's a lot of different opinions on what needs to be done. The elected officials are not all saying, okay, this is what we need to do right now. And we can see that our response is different in the second round. I don't want anybody listening to us to think that the security establishment is the one that should be taking care of it. I'm only saying that we're seeing a vastly different response in the second round, and part of that is because we're not doing it in a hierarchy way that we were in the first few months.
Very interesting. And I like that you brought up how the national security establishment, the security establishment is the one really standing up and handling a lot of the issues or trying to come up with the solutions that the government is trying to implement. There was a very interesting article in the Jerusalem Post not long ago that I'll just give you the headline before just asking a quick question. The headline says, if COVID-19 was a missile, Israel's reaction would be different. And it's a very interesting piece explaining how the reaction of the Israeli public, the reaction of the Israeli government, both from a coalition standpoint and national security standpoint would be very different if this were 1,000 missiles coming from Hezbollah over a weekend. We would, it lays out a scenario as well where this amount of people would be injured, laying it out in similar way to how COVID-19 has affected the Israeli public health and healthcare, etc., and stating outright that it doesn't seem like the prime minister would tweet out attacks against journalists or attorney general or someone like that in the midst of rockets falling on Israel. So why is this so much different? And so then the question really is to you, as mentioned, about the national security. Do you think that it would be much different if it were rockets falling on Israel? Would the reaction be different? Would the solution be much different? Would there be overdrive to find a solution to the rocket problem if it were rockets and not this pandemic?
So it's interesting because part of my response is going to be to the way that you ask the questions. Etai, rockets are not fired at Israel. Somebody fires the rockets at Israel. It doesn't matter if it's Hezbollah, it doesn't matter if it's Shiites or Syrians inside Syria or Iran, the three arenas right now where we have militias, forces, countries who fire rockets at us. A pandemic, who's responsible for the pandemic? Who brought the illness here? How do you stop something where it isn't that in a clear-cut way you have an authority that's responsible? And I would say that that's why there's such a big difference in the response, not just in Israel, but worldwide, because it's a lot harder to handle something where you can't really put a finger onto who is responsible. I'm going to open up parenthesis and come back to the question again, that in some of the arenas we've seen that even the President of the United States has said that China is responsible, meaning trying to take the pandemic and to put somebody responsible on it, or the World Health Organization, WHO, has not responded, so they're responsible. The WHO didn't start the pandemic. If China did or didn't, I can't say, start something at the end of pandemic that goes worldwide, is not something that you can handle in the same way. And that also means that the response is different. Having said all of that, I absolutely think that when you respond to a challenge like a pandemic, it could, and I think should be similar. Your response should be similar to the way that you would answer somebody firing rockets at you. Yes, it's more difficult, but that is how you would handle it. It's something which is affecting everybody. You have to look at your entire population. You have to give an overall response. In Israel, for throughout our existence, our 72 years of existence, there's no question that the strongest arm that was developed in Israel is our national security arm. So yes, you use your strongest arm to help you face what right now is the biggest challenge. Now we already get into politics. You already mentioned that a bit before. Why aren't we responding in the same way? Why are we not allowing national security, the cabinet, and others? We have to do a special cabinet. Yes, you're adding in, there's a whole security aspect, but there's a whole public health aspect. You let the health officials who are the experts to run that aspect, but then you need somebody to implement it. And as it is right now in Israel, those who know how to implement overall responses to real big challenges are only the national security capabilities in Israel. And I think that they should be given much more of a role than what they've been given until now.
What type of role do you think they should take on then?
I think you need an authority, which is an overall authority. And it's something that the government has to give. But it does mean giving the national security capabilities who know how to bring into the same room. You have a protocol for emergency that in Israel was done by the Home Front. It's the only one that we have that both exists and it's been active and it knows how to respond, and we need to use that. Now, again, for everybody, it seems what? The military has to take over everything? No, but they're the ones who actually have a built-in hierarchy response. The Home Front was the one that knew how to go into the different neighborhoods and to help out and to give out the food. And so I do think that if you take the type of emergency authority that exists for when the missiles come and you use it, to be able to handle the pandemic right now. It is the authority, meaning it's an overall one where they have real authority to be able to tell the police, the health authorities, for everybody to work out, for at the end to be for the benefit of all of Israelis, citizens and non-citizens. And I'll go so far as to say in Israel, with the relationship to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, because when it comes to the pandemic, it's very challenging to close all of the doors. And so you need to do it through the National Security Authority. That's how I look at it. I don't think that it will happen because of politics. Remember that in the middle of all of this pandemic, Israel both went to elections. We've established a new government. That government is not an easy fit. And here we're seeing the differences between prime minister, the defense minister, health minister, just the way that that's working out is going on governmental political lines. Who's going to lead it?
Very interesting, as I think you're right. You need to use the established infrastructure that you already have to be able to respond. I think in the United States, there isn't necessarily, from the military standpoint, the need to use the military. There's organizations like FEMA and things like that from the federal government that are able to respond. So I think people need to take that into consideration when looking at why Israel would use its national security apparatus. As you mentioned, A, it's its strongest arm, and B, it's the one with infrastructure already established that knows how to deal with scenarios like this. Something I wanted to ask you, as you brought up Homefront Command, etc., was, do you think that the response needs to be similar to that of a natural disaster? Because that's where Homefront Command is truly at its best, and we've seen it. Israel has sent Homefront Command around the world to go help in natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, etc. Do you think that maybe people need to look at the pandemic from maybe a natural disaster standpoint, and then they would feel more comfortable with implementing Homefront Command into that role?
I think that's a wonderful way to look at it. And I'll add in that you mentioned FEMA. And in that sense, in Israel, our parallel to that is the Homefront Command, which is going to be there for earthquakes and going to be there inside the home front to help us out in different aspects. Use it. It exists, and it exists for all of Israel. And I'll even say that in the first 2 months of the pandemic, it deployed not in what you would call regular border home front scenarios. It went into Arab cities of Israel because they needed somebody who could go in and who could, give out supplies and implement that. And they did it in dialogue inside the Israeli military in general. Also inside the home front, we have Arab citizens of Israel, Arabic-speaking citizens, Druze. It's much broader in that sense. When they wanted to do that in Beitar Elite, an ultra-Orthodox town, in Bnei Brak, an ultra-Orthodox town, you had military commanders who were running it. And again, everybody looks at it and goes, oh my God, they're bringing in the military. And I'm saying they're bringing in the strongest arm in Israel who knows how to do things like that. Now, here I want to be very clear. It should be the home front. This isn't about taking the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, that is what secures us from lots of other threats that we'll talk about in a moment, because they haven't disappeared in the pandemic. And it isn't saying, let's take all of those forces now and have them go fight the real battle. No. That other battle still exists. That battleground exists. And I am saying you can use a home front, which is based both on compulsory soldiers and a compulsory backbone that has an enormous amount of reserve servicemen, call them up and have them do that. And I think, to me, it's the way that I'd like us to try and contend with it. And I feel, that's my own personal opinion right now, that it's not happening a lot because of domestic Israeli politics, which never disappeared and are going through this pandemic with us.
Yeah, it's a real challenge, and it's a shame how politics sometimes get in, or all the time, get in the way of decisions, get in the way of benefiting the general public as a whole. As you made mention, it seems like that would probably be the smartest and most logical way to attack the pandemic, with already built-in infrastructure that you already have that also works and does it well. But I digress. As you mentioned, there are quite a few threats facing the state of Israel that have not gone away during the pandemic. So maybe you can explain a little bit about those threats that Israel is facing, first and foremost. And second of all, if you could go into it in a way, explain if those threats have shifted or changed in any way due to the pandemic.
So I want to do a zoom out and then a zoom in with the pandemic. And in my zoom out, I'll remind ourselves, Israel has borders. By the way, they're not what we would call legal borders agreed upon, but for the moment, we're going to talk about the borders or our armistice lines. We border, we're next to a dysfunctional, failing country called Lebanon, which has within it the force we know as Hezbollah and a lot of other challenges. We have a 138-kilometer border with Lebanon. We have a 79-kilometer border with Syria, which I may not call right now a failed state, but I'm certainly not going to call it a functional, happy one. It is in a state of slightly getting out of a decade of a harsh, harsh war. The war isn't over. Happens to be that right now the war isn't on our border, but it still exists quite nearby. So that's two countries that we border. We have an exceedingly long, over 400-kilometer border with the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Jordan is a country that borders Iraq, borders Syria, borders Saudi Arabia. That's just three of our borders: Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and we have a long border with Egypt, 195 kilometers. And I give those because those are our close by outer borders. And a step away from that, we all know over 1,000 kilometers from Israel, however, there is no real barrier in that sense. There's no sea or ocean. Yonder out towards the east, we have Iran and the Islamic regime of Iran. So look at all of these different things I just brought up right now. And in that zoom out, I want to remind us all that in the pandemic, and certainly until it caught on and as it's catching on, including in these countries surrounding us, we have had a treaty, a peace treaty, both with Egypt and with Jordan, that have sustained through a lot of different things that have happened over the last 25 years with Jordan and over 40 years with Egypt. We have a state of war with the country called Lebanon, and within Lebanon, we've had two overt wars with Hezbollah. 2006 is just against Hezbollah, and that's inside Lebanon and broader. Why am I bringing that up right now? Because under the level of the pandemic, all of the challenges of Hezbollah, hundreds of thousands of rockets, precision munitions, the rhetoric, meaning what we talk about, of the Secretary General of Hezbollah, of the Hezbollah inside Lebanese politics, and again, we have a 138-kilometer border with them, has completely continued. When the Secretary General of Hezbollah talks about the fact that Lebanon needs to get out of it, and he gives his weekly sermon, and I sit and listen to his weekly sermon. He's very charismatic. He's a very strong, very out there, no, not outside there, but very verbal person. He's a very strong Arabic orator. He knows how to talk. And even if you don't understand a word of Arabic, watch him. It's the movements, it's the face, it's the way that he connects. He's a very strong connector. And he, over the last few months, inside Lebanon, continues to blame Israel, us, the Zionist entity, for everything, continues to strive to precise munitions, to more weapons, even as the country called Lebanon is in absolute collapse. No financial backbone, they're losing their economy. And what he did last week, as they're losing the economy and everybody is blaming everybody, but nobody's doing anything, is what did he call for? For Lebanon to go to what he called an agricultural jihad, using the term jihad. He likes that term. And in his agricultural jihad, that Lebanon, a country that was a financial institution for the greater Middle East, they should now all become farmers. So I look at that on the other side of the fence under the aspect of COVID-19. The challenges that Lebanon faces did not start in COVID-19. They were long before that. They were going through a huge economic crunch, and they are now, right now, imploding. My challenge is that COVID-19 makes it that much worse. I always am very challenged when domestic issues in Syria, in Lebanon, could be in Iraq or in Iran or in Yemen. Countries, Israel does not have a border, not with Iraq, not with Iran, not with Yemen. And yet, in their domestic rhetoric, when they want to talk about challenges, there's one that they managed to get united behind, and that's us. And COVID-19, where you'd think there'd be this common ground, remember, it's a pandemic, it's hurting us all, that would bring something different, at least in some way in the rhetoric. Not at all. It's all stayed there. And under the radar of COVID-19, which has made Jordan keep people physically inside their houses, they actually had a lockdown for months. We didn't do it for months. They locked people down. They managed to have a very low level of deaths. I mean, I say that to their good, but the rhetoric, with the whole aspect of Israel, our elections, the declarations by the prime minister about potential annexation, the government having within it the idea of annexing the Jordan Valley and a bit more within Judea and Samaria, suddenly, like COVID-19, Schmovid-19, they're talking about that. It's like, what's the most important right now? Closer to home, the Palestinian arena, both in Judea and Samaria areas A and B and C, in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, disconnecting the security cooperation between Israel and the West Bank. They've cut it off, and it's called cutting off your nose to spite your face at the height of coronavirus. They just announced over the last few days that they don't have enough of the machines that we talk about so much in this time period. You cannot get in and out of the West Bank without going through Israel. I want to be very clear. We control the entrances and exits, including the ones that go towards Jordan. And in cutting off your nose to spite your face, you have to go through Israel to be able to get there. No cooperation. You don't want the machines. You want to blame us for everything happening there. It is a horrific cycle under the pandemic itself that has not gotten any better. You may want to ask some questions about that, because I went off on a tirade in that sense, because I look around, I see the exact same threats, and under the COVID-19, some of them are getting worse, not better.
Which would you express are getting worse?
So I'll give the following. One is the Islamic State. We all kind of went to sleep in 2018. The President of the United States said, yay, we've destroyed the Islamic State, or as he said, it's gone. It was never gone. It maybe was destroyed in its physical territorial sense, specifically inside areas of Syria and Iraq, but it was never destroyed in the ideological sense, and it's spread out beyond Syria, Iraq to additional places. For example, and it also has been for many years in the Sinai Peninsula, right next to Israel on the Egyptian side of the Israeli-Egyptian border. So it's another one of our quiet, peaceful borders, and it's not peaceful. And under COVID-19, everybody went inside. The Egyptian government says go inside. The Syrian government says go inside, as much as it can. So you and me, we're going to stay home. The Islamic State, under COVID-19, under everybody going inside, has been raising its head, both in Syria and in Iraq, and in Jordan, and in the Sinai Peninsula, and in a lot of additional places. That's not good news for anybody. In addition to that, as I mentioned before, Hezbollah has joined the Lebanese politics years ago. And in the last few years, it has been the person behind telling the government what to do. And in this specific government right now that was put together a couple of years ago, and then at the beginning of this year, there's a technocrat government, but the health minister is a Shiite Hezbollah person. The health minister, the one who's supposed to be doing things for Lebanon. It's a country. If Lebanese are dying, okay, if they don't have any kind of health care, if COVID-19 takes off, their economy is already gone, and Hezbollah is the strong arm behind there, I'm just sadly I'm sitting here and waiting for the coup that has not happened until now inside Lebanon, for officially Hezbollah saying, well, nobody else is going to pick it up. I'll take care of it. That's slowly where it's going to right now inside Lebanon.
Could I ask you a
Iran,
question about that follow-up
sure,
there specifically? Because
sure.
I think that changes the nature of the threat on the Lebanese border if Hezbollah were to officially take over the government in that sense in full capacity. I think multiple things would have to happen. I think the U.S. would have to reassess its assistance to the Lebanese army and arms sales. I think the Lebanese army would then be designated by Israel as an official target in that sense if Hezbollah is running it. I think the nature of the challenge and the threat changes. I think it broadens the threat, but also broadens the response that Israel can take vis-a-vis Hezbollah and or Lebanon. So what are your thoughts on if a coup were to happen or Hezbollah were to officially take over the government as a whole, as you mentioned, where it's almost a matter of time, how does the response and the threat change due to that?
So I don't know that a coup is going to happen. As I said, when I'm sitting and waiting, that's part of that challenge of what Hassan Nasrallah wants. I think in its own way, it's very convenient for him right now. They are a non-state, enormously huge military capability, but they're not under the state. Let the state fail. I'll step in when they ask me to step in. Now they Hezbollah, present all of their involvement in the Syrian war over the last decade, I mean, from 2011, as being A, Syria asked us to come, B, we were doing it to protect Syrians, whoever that is. We were protecting them against those infidels in the West and the Zionists and all of the bad guys. And Hezbollah present themselves inside Lebanon as doing the exact same. We're there to help out. We're Lebanese. But the question that I'm going to ask is how much they actually want to step in and be at the end the government, meaning to take that step of actually doing the coup. I'm not sure, but I certainly think that they're becoming more and more involved in making sure that the government does what they want in the way that they want. And that has to do with the demonstrations that have been in Lebanon over the last few weeks and over the last, I mean, we're heading in towards a year. The demonstrations there, they actually have real demonstrations there, have been there for almost a year. I mean, they started in the end of September, beginning of October last year, and here we are at the end of July, mid-July. I'm losing my sense of time in this pandemic. Been home a lot, right? And I think that if Hezbollah would officially take over, I'm going to say something I don't want to be taken out of context, okay? If Hezbollah takes over, it's as if easier for Israel because Lebanon becomes a much more clear-cut target. But when I say that, I want to remind, at the end, half of Lebanese are not Muslim Shiite. Not all Muslim Shiite automatically call for the destruction of Israel. That's Hezbollah fighters. And being a Hezbollah supporter doesn't mean that the first thing that you're thinking of is destruction of Israel. Hezbollah does a lot of different things there. And that's not because I support Hezbollah. I'm just saying that I don't like categorizing everybody in one way. I think that the official government of Israel would find it very easy in that sense. If Lebanon was taken over by a coup by Hezbollah, that's it. We would step up what we do covertly, much more overtly against Lebanon, Hezbollah inside. There have been new documents that have come out based on open sources. I'm a little wary of open sources, but I support the idea of getting it out there, of the different precision munition sites that Hezbollah holds at the heart of Beirut. Beirut is not just a Shiite Hezbollah city. It is, I mean, it was, I imagine it still is, that challenge of polarizing societies is not just in the United States or inside Israel or inside Europe right now. There are polarizing societies also inside the Middle East, and Lebanon is actually one of those examples. So it would be very challenging because you don't want to immediately say, okay, everything's a target, knock out, for example, electricity, fuel, which they don't have anyways right now, but that's something else. You knock that out because they're a legit target right now because it's Hezbollah, but you're going to be hurting everybody in Lebanon. Everybody's going to hate you there. Do you want to do that? Do you want to be, I think that we're much better when we are precise and exact and hit the targets that everybody is against, both the Lebanese who are against Hezbollah and us and perhaps other ones, and not hitting accidentally or otherwise targets that have a more general type of use, for example, electrical facilities.
As we circle back to the other threats facing Israel, you mentioned Shiite Muslims, so we move to the largest Shiite Muslim population, the state sponsor of Hezbollah, the Islamic regime of Iran. Maybe you can go on to a little bit of an explanation on the tit for tat that we have been seeing between Israel and Iran. I don't know what we can really get into what's been going on in Iran recently. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of challenging information being put out there. However, we can mention that there have been 8 explosions in the last 3 weeks or so inside Iran at gas facilities, at nuclear facilities. There is a lot of rhetoric, international rhetoric, that is, that Israel's behind this, that the United States is supporting Israel in its attacks against Iran here. We do know that Israel has been fighting what we call the shadow war versus Iran over the last decade. Syria has become a prime battleground where Israel has overtly attacked Iranian interests, Iranian personnel. We've seen the Iranians step up attacks against Americans inside Iraq. With its other Hezbollah group that is sitting inside of Iraq right now, shooting rockets in Baghdad. We saw the Americans bring in an anti-rocket defense system into the heart of Baghdad. So Iran is spreading its tentacles and doesn't seem to be slowing down, regardless of the pandemic, regardless of the economic sanctions and problems that they're having domestically. Didn't even mention Yemen, where they're fighting with Saudi Arabia, and the obvious
Against Saudi Arabia.
Yes, sorry, against Saudi Arabia, and of course Hamas inside the Gaza Strip, which is always a thorn in Israel's side. So maybe you can lay out what is going on with Iran exactly.
I'm not going to be able right now to give more information in that sense about what goes on. I think that you just gave an excellent overview of all sorts of different events that we've all been following. And what I want to do again is I'm going to zoom out again and zoom in. Iran is a country of 85 million people. And I want to say that because Iran is one of the 15 largest countries in the world. It is not a small country. Remember, Israel at the end, yay, we're 9 million. We're in a much smaller group. 85 million people who need to have an economy, who need to be educated. You need to build skills. Half the population in Iran is under the age of 25. Again, I want to put that in numbers. 85 million people. That means, I'm really bad at math, but more or less 23 million people, right? No, I'm bad at math. 42, God, that was embarrassing, right? Okay. 42 million people are under the age of 25. Okay. How many new schools have been built? How many new jobs have been created? How many new housing things have been built? And this challenge in Iran is a domestic one where we constantly go on the side of it. Second aspect, aside from that size and the number, the demographics, is the aspect that Iran, Persian speaking, yes, it's Muslim, yes, it's Shiite, but it's not Arabic. And I say Persian speaking because we need to remember that there is a little bit of a distance, there's a challenge here, and it comes up and down. And over the last decade, it came up and down. Hamas at a certain stage along the way had to choose, am I Sunni or am I taking this Iranian Persian speaking Shiite money? And they chose to disconnect, and then life did what it does, and they went back and are willing to take the money. Iran takes its resources, which in its own way used to be 2. They had oil. Etai, they still sell oil. You go, who's going to buy it? North Korea. Who's going to buy it? China. You don't need anybody else if China buys your oil. So that when we look at it, we look at sanctions and the effectiveness. There is somebody to sell it to. Now, oil even when there's somebody that you can sell it to, is at the absolute lowest price that it's been at since I can ever remember. Okay, I haven't been around in that sense since it went so low. That has an impact because they have an income from oil, okay? And they invested that income in that Islamic regime's vision of the future, which is not Shiite. They don't call themselves the Shiite regime. It's the Islamic regime. And I say that because I want to emphasize that Saudi Arabia and Iran are the two countries that go by Islamic law, and that law is very similar in Saudi Arabia and in Iran, and I'd actually say it's harsher in Saudi Arabia, more strict than it is in Iran. So I said two assets. They have oil, that gives them money, that gives them income, even if that income has gone down because the oil price has gone down and not because they can't sell it. And the second asset that Iran has always had that we do not talk about enough is their education and their people. And I already said demographics, half the population under the age of, 42 million people under the age of 25, but they have an education system, on the side of the whole Ukrainian plane that they downed and that we're all talking about. We haven't noticed that there are Iranian PhDs, Persian, who come from Iran, study overseas, and come back to Iran. That's part of who they are. They have a very strong military development, a military industry, defense industry. They know how to reverse engineer. That's not an easy thing. They build their own rockets and then they supply them to Hezbollah. They build their own capabilities, their own munitions, supplying them to Bashar Assad, to Hezbollah in Iraq, to Hezbollah in Yemen, to Hezbollah in Lebanon, who's all over the place. And so I think that we have a tendency, to look at it as sanctions will do it. They have an ideology. They use the two assets, oil money and their people, and it hasn't changed. We think that it certainly made it really, really hard. People there are asking, you're investing all of this money and it's not in us, in Iran. And that question is coming up. But they invested in horrific security apparatuses, and it's both the Revolutionary Guard and other forces to make sure that if somebody wants to stand up and say, do things differently, that voice will be closed. And they're investing in exporting the Islamic Revolution to Iraq, to Syria, to Lebanon, to Yemen, based on the Shiite minorities in those, well, Iraq it's a majority, but to the Shiite populations that are in those countries. But it isn't being sold to the Shiites. It's being sold as an Islamic revolution. And I think that what they have is their biggest asset nowadays in the Arabic-speaking world is not the oil. I think that their biggest asset is Hassan Nasrallah as an Arabic-speaking voice who is charismatic, who is an immense orator, and there is no voice in Arabic to compare to him in the Arabic-speaking world of today. Queen Rania, that we all love in Jordan, speaks magnificent English to the Western world. King Abdullah, amazing, King Abdullah II of Jordan, amazing pedigree. He's not an orator. He doesn't get people excited. Bashar Assad is boring. I mean, he's a terrible, horrific dictator, but as a speaker, he's boring. And I say that because all around right now, the one that you and I are doing a podcast, we're talking to each other. You talk to people who are interesting and to voices. You look at them online, people are watching Hassan Nasrallah. And I think of that today as being Persian-speaking Iran's biggest investment at the moment.
It's very interesting how you place that exactly and explain the exact nature of the Iranian threat. And I think that it's very imperative and important to understand exactly what you said, the investment in the population, and what's one of their biggest assets is 42 million people under the age of 25 that you can mobilize to do what you need to do, but also that's a danger to the regime. If they don't start feeding them and giving them jobs and opportunities, that can very well turn against them very quickly. 42 million people under the age of 25 without work, without food, without money, and the ability to raise a family, that's going to turn quickly on a regime that doesn't notice it properly or pay enough attention to that exact scenario. I think you brought up Hassan Nasrallah and the Arab-Persian tension and how he sort of mitigates that Arab-Persian tension and brings the Persian perspective, the Iranian Islamic perspective, to the forefront of the Arab community, which is imperative to the needs of the Iranians who are trying to build that land road, if you will, the bridge to the Mediterranean from Iran. They have somehow been able to overtake the Iraqi regime and sort of make it their own little puppet in that sense.
They're having some challenges on that one right now.
They are, but again, it something 20, 30 years ago you would have thought completely out of the realm of possibility when you think
Sure.
Iraq and Iran. Obviously, Saddam Hussein, things have drastically changed there, but the population hasn't changed so much, and the memories of an 8-year-long war of gassing one another and explosions and whatnot doesn't just disappear. And so the fact that Iran has been able, that's a very important aspect to notice. And then now, I guess the question is how does Israel view this threat coming from Iran when you do that zoom out that you just did, and we explained the overview? How does Israel now respond to this threat or look at this threat, view this threat from Iran, when that threat stretches now from the Mediterranean and Lebanon all the way across Syria, Iraq, into Iran, and we know that they're on our southern border with Gaza as well through Hamas?
So on this one, all you have to do is quote the Israeli Prime Minister, the Israeli Chief of Staff of the Israeli military, the Israeli Chief of the Air Force. In that sense, we have not been quiet about it. We have been active about it. We are the only, as far as I'm concerned, Western country who openly, even if we don't always claim it, have been acting against the Iranian regime and all of these different Iranian proxies, some of them more proxies, some of them quite independent, all over the Middle East. And I say that because I think that on this one, we have had a clear policy. We have been active on our policy, and we have put our money and our capabilities where our mouth is talking. And I say that because I think that we have been very different from the rest of the world. We have been criticized. This has come at a price. It's come at a price of a relationship with large portions of the North American population, of the Democrats, in the sense of the relationship at that time with President Obama. It's come at a huge price with Europe and different European countries. In that sense, we have taken a stand. We haven't said, you guys lead it. We see this as something which directly impacts us on our borders and further away, where there is a real threat to Israel, because within all of that rhetoric and the actions of the Iranians since 1979 and the revolution in the last 41 years, they've only invented one new holiday. All of the other holidays were the Islamic Shiite additional holidays that were out there, and that, excuse the comparison, is, you can have a Mimuna for Moroccan Jews, and you can have the Easter, which is the Orthodox, and the Easter that's Catholic, and they have Shiite holidays that are slightly different and added than Sunni holidays. No, they added one commemorative day, which is Al-Quds Day. Al-Quds is a double entendre, which to me, when it was done in over 40 years ago, and for the last 40 years, when it is commemorated, which is always the last Friday communal prayer during the month of Ramadan. I'll remind us all that Ramadan changes the time period that it is every year, because they go by a moon cycle, so that the holiday, the month of Ramadan, changes every year by 10 to 12 days. It goes backwards. But I say that day that they invented and that has been commemorated has taken off throughout the Middle East, way beyond the Shiite community. Hamas, BDS, worldwide use Al-Quds Day. And why is it a double entendre? It was established specifically to liberate Al-Quds. Al-Quds is Jerusalem. But when you translate the word, you say the holy. Yay, how lucky for them. You can use that double entendre. Who did the United States kill, take out, assassinate, target? January 3rd of 2020. The commander of the Iranian al-Quds force. So everybody wrote, it's the holy force. I'm like, it's a double term. It means the Jerusalem force, and it also means the holy force. And anybody who knows Arabic and beyond within that Arabic-speaking world know that it's a double term. You're not just saying the holy, you're saying the Arabic term, and it's been the Arabic term since the 7th century. This is not a modern term. It isn't something that the Iranians invented that they call Jerusalem al-Quds. And so I look at that Iranian threat, and I think that Israel has been very clear that that threat is something that directly impacts us, and that we have been active at preempting in a variety of ways. And all I can say is if we did all of the things they said we did, kudos to us. I don't think we do everything that they say we do. I think that Iran is both falling apart because they do not have an income. And where are they investing the money? So that they actually also have plain old bad infrastructure, gas explosions. But with everything else that's happening, we most definitely have been active and out there at the front line.
Very true, and very interesting way of placing all the threats and the response of Israel. I think it is on the Israeli side one of their more stronger positions, and one of the clearest positions this government has had. This government under Netanyahu has presented itself always as strong against Iran, standing up against Iran. Its policy has been clear. I wish they would have other policies. You don't have to agree with it, but I wish they would have other policies that were as clear and that you can dissect and understand and even make predictions on what will happen because you have clear policy in place. However,
you notice me nodding and totally agreeing with you.
Wish we could have such clear policy on everything. Before we let you go, Colonel Eisen, because it has been a long conversation and we've taken a lot of your time, so really appreciate it. I wanted to just ask you, has COVID-19 changed or presented a lasting change to the security establishment of Israel, as well as a lasting change to the geostrategy of the Middle East? Are we going, once the pandemic, I guess, subsides, second, third wave, whenever that might be, are we going to is everything going to revert back to pre-pandemic times, or has whatever happened changed in a lasting way?
Two opposing directions. One, I think it brought up walls, barriers that had already been taken down. It doesn't matter if it's between Israel and the West Bank and Israel and the Gaza Strip, if it's between the West Bank and Jordan, if it's between the different countries. Everybody has put up barriers that over the last decade had been very porous. And I don't think that that's going to change. I think that that's a difference that happened because of the pandemic, and that it's here for a while to be. And at the exact same time, I think that it's brought about some levels of cooperation, more open and slight ways, between Israel and some of the countries that do not have diplomatic ties with Israel, like the Gulf countries, because the pandemic, as we said at the beginning of our conversation, it's not missiles that are fired by a government, by a military, by a militia into Israel. It's spreading out everywhere all of the time. Middle East and North Africa have been as hit by COVID-19 as the rest of the world. But the Middle East and North Africa, all of the countries, including Iran, most of the population is young, half under the age of 25, 65% of the population is under the age of 35, which means they've had a lot of less deaths than, let's say, Europe. And that's something that they're going to notice right now. In that sense of where you invest, what you do, what a pandemic does, that enormous youth, but it's bringing about harsher unemployment. There are going to be less jobs, bigger challenges. Those are things that are going to be stuck with us, not just right now, not after the pandemic hopefully takes a turn, we find the vaccine. The economics of it are still going to be with us for years to come.
Very interesting. Colonel Eisen, want to thank you for this very sobering and enlightening conversation. For anyone that's joining us partway through, this has been a very wonderful conversation with retired Colonel Miri Eisen. She is associate in the International Institute for Counterterrorism. Colonel Eisen served in the Israeli intelligence community and officially retired from active duty at the rank of full colonel in 2004. Colonel Eisen, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and presenting the challenges that Israel faces over the next little while and on a daily basis from its enemies that surround us on multiple fronts, multiple borders, as you explained. However, it seems that the state and the military do have some clear policy towards these enemies and is doing the best that they can to protect the Israeli home front and the Israeli citizens. We thank you very much for your service, but also for your time and explanation.
Thank you all so much. I want to hope that everybody will keep safe and secure and that we will turn a corner when it comes to the pandemic.
Most definitely. Thank you and stay safe and healthy.
For all of us. Shalom.
Shalom.